If you asked me what I thought I'd be doing at 3 in the morning on some random September morning, I never would have thought playing spin the bottle with a fox girl and a succubus would be my answer. The 5 of us sat in Anton's old western house, grouped around a small glowing jar in a circle. Cora reached out and spun the jar, knocking around the small glowing fireflies gathered inside. Eventually it came to a stop, the jar pointing at Kieran.
All right, long ears, pucker up,
said Cora with a smirk.
No way! I thought we were just playing truth or dare.
Kieran exclaimed, backing away from Cora. She frowned, reaching back and playing with her heart-tipped tail.
Fine, truth or dare.
I think... truth,
he answered.
Pussy.
Cora commented before asking.
So what's your real name? Like your real life name, not your IGN.
Kieran,
he answered simply.
You use your real name in your username?
She asked.
Did you?
He replied. She shook her head.
Nope, Sylvia.
That's a really pretty name,
Kira commented with a grin.
What about you guys?
Kieran asked the rest of us. Dylan, I told them.
Kira Liru-san.
Kira exclaimed.
Brooke.
Liru answered as she twiddled her fingers nervously. The jar was spun once more, this time landing on Liru. She chose truth as well.
All right. What is your dream, Liru?
Kieran asked.
What's with all the personal questions?
She asked rudely. Kieran frowned.
Oh, sorry. If that's too much,
No, it's fine.
She said, crossing her arms.
I guess. I'd like to master a sword and become the best of the best at swordsmanship. Learn all the attacks to a point.
Is that really your life goal?
Kira asked. She shrugged.
I mean, I don't really have anything else in the real world. Just school and... well... I always thought of going to law school someday.
I could see that, I commented, earning a light kick from Liru to my shin.
Sorry, force a habit.
She answered.
Well, my dream, personally, is to learn how to cook some more. I don't know where life will lead me, but I hope that I'll be able to cook some good food for the people around me when we get there.
I don't know what I'd like to do. I've got a kinda living in the moment attitude, you know?
Yeah, I get it. Though, for me, I think I just want to find someone.
Cora told us.
By someone, do you mean a boyfriend?
Kira smiled.
Aw, is Cora looking for love?
Shut up!
She whined weakly.
I mean, I love doing my thing and all, but I think I'd want to find someone eventually. Just someone I can settle down with.
That's sweet, Cora.
Liru told her politely.
Repeat that to anyone and I'll slit your throat.
Kira then looked over to me.
What about you, Aldren-kun?
I frowned, taking a few moments to think before shrugging. I don't know. You know, I've never really thought about the future. I mean, even when it gets brought up at school, I honestly never thought I'd make it this far.
What do you mean?
Kira asked, her smiling fading. I'm not exactly in the best standing in the real world, so I didn't really think I'd get anywhere. I mean, I'm not smart, I'm not tough, so, just... Future never crossed my mind, I said before. Truthfully, that was not my original answer. I could have told them what happened that day when I bought this game. The nearly successful suicide attempt, only one in a line of many that preceded it. But I didn't want this place to turn into a TED Talk, so I didn't mention any of it. The bottle was spun once again by Cora, this time landing on Kira.
I'll pick dare,
she said peacefully. A smirk flashed across Cora's face.
Well, if everyone has to take the dare, I dare everyone to bend over and pull down their—
Let's keep this PG-13, Cora!
Liru exclaimed as she got up.
Instead of turning this game into an ecchi anime, let's just focus on what's next to come.
What do you mean? I asked.
The duel tomorrow.
Liru told me.
If we're gonna figure out where the next boss is, we're gonna need you to win the duel.
Why don't you fight him? I asked her. You're the strongest out of us all.
Because you shook his hand. You agreed to the fight, and I have a feeling he won't honor the deal otherwise. And so, we'll need to prepare you to win the fight.
And how are you supposed to do that? I questioned. Lyra opened her inventory, scrolling through before dropping several items onto the table. When she closed it, a large array of gear was left beside her.
Right now, you only have your armor from the Warlock King fight equipped. It's good, but not enough to defend you against him. That gun of his is like nothing I've ever seen before, and if you're gonna beat it with a sword, you'll need gear.
Lyra explained. She tossed me 2 rings, which I slipped onto my fingers. In my equipment menu, the 2 appeared in my empty ring slots. A ring of protection, adding 15 plus defense, and a ring of swiftness, adding 9 plus speed. Small boosts, but useful. What do you have against his laser bullets? I asked curiously. She tossed me a small, glowing blue crystal. I caught the crystal in my hand, staring down at the glittering object. Faint glowing lights were floating within the stone, shining brightly through its translucent body.
A swiftness crystal. It'll give you a temporary speed boost that'll most likely give you an edge over him. If you can dodge his bullets and get close, it's over,
she told me. Who is this boss, anyway? I asked Lyra curiously as I poked at the crystal.
His name is Dawnslayer, the Pyramid Guardian. He is the protector of the Anubis Temple, an ancient structure hidden somewhere within the desert. However, we have no idea where the temple is, nor how to get inside. Anton's information is our best bet,
she explained. Any lore behind this one? I questioned.
Dawnslayer was responsible for plaguing the Eidolon realm with eternal darkness at one point, causing the darkest monsters to lead the land into a state of travesty. However, it was the discovery of the energy crystals that allowed the people to defeat him and take back the Crystal Desert, sealing him within that temple,
she told me in a bored tone of voice. I poked the crystal in my hands before turning back to the others, watching as Cora attempted to wrestle Kieran to the ground, grabbing at his cloak.
Just let me have some of your blood!
She shouted. I sighed, rushing forward to help separate the two alongside Kira and Liru. My eyes flickered open and I looked up at the sight in front of me, seeing a fox girl sitting on my lap. She was smiling, a half-eaten pancake in her mouth.
Good morning, Aldren-kun,
she said as she dropped the pancake into her hands. I smiled nervously as I sat up, watching as she skipped back over to the table. She and Liru were already over there, eating breakfast from Anton's storage footlockers. Where's Kieran? Did Cora get a hold of him? I asked. Kira pointed to the bed behind me, and I turned over to see Kieran fast asleep, a naked figure cuddled up behind him. Cora was lying next to him, sinking her fangs deep into his neck in her sleep. Neither were aware of the situation, but I'm sure at least one of them would be pleased. Kira waved her wand, shooting forward a small spark that exploded like a firework beside the bed. The two jumped up, Cora tearing her fangs from Kieran's neck and spilling blood onto the floor.
Ow!
Kieran exclaimed before turning around and seeing Cora's naked body behind him. She smirked and he scrambled away, earning a chuckle from the succubus. Kira used a spell to re-equip Cora's clothes on her body, and immediately after, the door swung open. Anton stepped inside, a beer mug in hand.
Sorry, stepped out for an early morning drink,
he said before setting the mug down on the table.
Are you an alcoholic?
Lero asked. He chuckled.
That's the same thing my girl asked me a few weeks ago. Don't worry, I'm clean.
Anton then turned to me and smiled.
You ready?
I gulped. Yeah, guess so. Minutes later, we were all gathered outside. Kira, Liru, Kieran, and Cora were standing to the side while I faced Anton at the end of the path, both of our bodies invigorated with energy. A glowing blue box appeared in front of me, a duel request written onto it. I begrudgingly tapped on the accept button, causing a countdown to appear. With every number, I felt my anxiety rising. Despite that, I unsheathed my sword and crushed the swiftness crystal in my hand. Then, it started. I quickly dodged all 3 shots, zigzagging in his direction swiftly. He fired again and I slashed my sword, cutting straight through my attack as I lunged at him. Anton ducked beneath my attack and clashed with my sword, his metal 6-shooter slamming against it. If it wasn't for his strength, I would have easily been able to overpower him. That crystal was giving me enough speed to dodge all of his attacks, so all I had to do was avert his expectations. He pulled the trigger, shooting me in the leg once. I fell to my knees and he held up his gun to finish me, but I slashed my sword across his leg, injuring him. I scrambled to my feet and swung again, but he fired another 6 shots in my direction as I backed up. I blocked each shot with my sword, slashing through the burst of energy with ease. I then ducked under a 7th shot before swinging upwards, knocking one of his revolvers out of his hand. He fired again, shooting me in the shoulder. I cringed, quickly realizing I couldn't do this without outsmarting him. I need a distraction, I thought to myself. And then an idea came to mind. I slammed my sword into the ground and shouted, "Spiraling whirlwind!" Anton watched in shock as a whirling twister burst out of the ground, kicking up sand from the ground and absorbing it. The sandstorm then shot forward, engulfing the gunslinger within. He stood his ground, braving the storm until the attack faded. When the storm was gone, so was I. Anton's eyes darted around to find me, but he didn't realize I was only feet away. I dug my sword into his back, blood squirting out onto the floor. He clutched at his heart as he fell forward, badly injured by the attack.
Good game, man.
He said with a smile. I smiled back. You too. Now, can you help us?
Yeah, in a minute.
He said, tired out by the battle. He sighed, slowly rubbing his hand against his bloody wound. His blood was a jet black shade, contrary to the scarlet blood I had seen up to this point. Aren't you human? I asked, staring forward at his blood. Why is it—
Aldren!
Kieran rushed onto the field, raising his staff and firing a jet of magic forward. I tried to block the attack, but there was no need. Anton raised his hand, blasting both me and the attack backwards with a burst of wind. I slammed into the ground, my sword landing beside me as the figure known as Anton began to morph. It was something out of a nightmare. His evil gaze pierced my soul, and his deathly claws filled with dark energy. A mummy appeared before us, the pure darkness hidden within his sandy wraps. A pair of glowing red eyes shot out of the eye slits on his head, and 2 shadowy claws crept out from beneath his floating wrappings. "What's going on?" I asked the others.
That's not Anton! It's the boss!
Liru screamed. Kieran dodged a second slash attack, leaping back as the Pyramid Guardian summoned a golden Egyptian staff into his grasp. Kieran grabbed his staff and fired a blast of magic, shooting the guy in the chest with pure red energy. The mummy stumbled back as Kieran continued the stream of energy. However, his own energy began to get lower and lower until the magic stopped. The mummy took this chance to slash Kieran across the stomach, sending him to his knees. I grabbed my star blade and swung at the guy. However, he dodged. The mummy changed back into the ball of darkness and began to speed down the path out of town. Kieran got up and we stared at it as it began to disappear from sight. "We need to follow it," I exclaimed. "It might lead us to the temple." Kieran pointed to the left.
There!
I dashed over to a group of wooden stables sitting to the side of the road, watching as a menu popped up. It asked if I wanted to rent a horse for 50 world chips an hour, which I did. The stable opened to reveal a black horse and white horse, both with gold manes. Kieran got on his and I got on mine, both of us imitating what cowboys did in the movies and causing both horses to whinny and ride off after the creature. As we raced after the boss, the sun shone bright above us. Our horses galloped across the sand, kicking up a path of dust behind us as we caught up. I drew my sword to strike it down when I got close, but the boss didn't want that happening. It began to glow, and something sparkled in the sand. "Kieran, strafe!" A large crystal burst from the sand behind it, going up to maybe 10 feet tall. More and more began to rise up from the ground abruptly, catching us in our path. I rode to the left, managing to get out of its path. However, Kieran wouldn't let go, and rode through it. He was fast, and his horse was good. He was catching up and slowly removed his staff from his back to send a blast of magic at it. If he could strike the boss with a spell, he could stop it from escaping. However, the boss wasn't over with his tricks. The crystals began to glow, and I watched in horror as spikes burst from the sides. Kieran ducked to avoid them, but they kept popping up at every point. One slashed his shoulder, leaving a large cut, but he didn't give up. The crystal on the tip of his staff began to glow as he prepared his spell. He got close enough to fire. I stopped my horse, letting the creature hover off into the distance. The crystals stopped forming, leaving behind a large path. I stared at Kieran, who'd been bucked from his horse. He was leaning against a crystal, clutching his side. His horse was behind him, and I soon saw what was wrong. A large spike was embedded into the horse, blood trickling down its white body. It gave one last whinny before fading away into the light and despawning. I then looked at Kieran and saw it. The small drips of red popping up on the sand. The crystal sunk into the ground and he fell backwards onto the ground. I ran forward and caught him, seeing the life fading from his eyes. His hands were shaking as he looked up at me with a half-hearted smile. The spike had left a large hole running through his waist, and blood was spewing out onto the sand. I lip began to quiver as he muttered something silently into my ear before his body became limp. He took one final gasp of air before finally he was gone. I stood up and looked to my horse, seeing that it was gone. Most likely it despawned or ran off. Wherever it went, it'd be fine. Maybe it joined its friend in the code of dead creatures. Hopefully Kira and the others would find us. Well, find me. Something moved close, and I quickly reached for my starblade, but when I looked around, nothing was there. Just me and Kieran's body. I stabbed my starblade into the ground in case I needed it and looked at his body. Something wasn't right. He hadn't despawned yet. I knelt down to his body and looked over the bloody sight. It hurt to move my eyes from his lifeless face and glossy white eyes down to the large hole poking through his chest. However, something was wrong. I looked at his ears. They weren't elf ears. His scar on the side of his face was gone too. Slowly, Kieran's head moved up to my ear.
It's a trick.
He pulled a large black knife out of thin air, the weapon forming out of shadows. I backed away as he attempted to stab it into my body, and I attempted to get up, but he grabbed my ankle. I reached out for my sword, but it was far away, and his grip was too strong. He pulled me close, moving himself onto my body. My hand gripped his wrist as he began to force the knife downwards at my heart. His hand shook as I held it away with all my strength. However, he was older and a higher level. This wasn't even Kieran at all. It was the boss. Finally, I began to realize that I couldn't hold on anymore. I reached out for the starblade once more, but it was too far. Even if I got close enough, I could only grab the blade and not the hilt. I looked back to Kieran, staring into his cold, dead eyes. I then moved my hands off him, letting him drive the knife into my heart. Only blood. I watched as his body became limp once more, his head falling to my chest. I pushed his body up and looked up, seeing Cora standing over me with her staff.
Maybe I should have you repay me with a few favors. Give my body some pleasure, maybe.
No thanks.
Not your choice.
She put her hand out and I took it, getting up off the ground. Kira was standing nearby, holding out my blade. I smiled and sheathed it after she handed it to me. We all then looked at Kieran.
That explains why he was resisting my advances last night.
Cora said, her hands on her hips.
He's gay.
Kira stated bluntly.
Oh, well, that explains a lot.
Cora said. I looked out into the distance to see the path of sand the boss had kicked up. However, it had faded away, and there was no trace it was even here. If that was a fake, then the boss must have the real Kieran, I told them. Kira cursed beneath her breath, surprising me.
Shit. So, where do we go? Lyra's back at town looking for the real Anton, but if he can't help us, we need a plan B.
I stared out into the distance, eyeing the large crystal structure shooting out of the ground. As I spotted a bright twinkle in one of them, an idea came to mind. Anyone got a map? After presenting my idea to the two, we set off. With my horse and Kieran's despawned, we had to walk, but after taking a few looks at the map, I identified our destination and we set off.
What is this place?
Kira asked as we spotted the structure on the horizon. When I first spawned in, someone told me that the Crystal Desert was the most populated area because it has the least amount of structures to load in, so people with bad computers can play without having to worry about lag, I explained to them. So I checked the map for any settlements in the desert with the least amount of crystals nearby, and here we are.
And where exactly are we?
Cora asked as she stabbed her bow staff into the sand. Kutaki Fortress, I told her as I eyed the map. A large circle resembling steel walls sat in the corner of the desert, and inside were an array of red and yellow roofed houses, along with a large bluish crater of sorts. The three of us stood at the top of a sand dune, staring up at a large metal wall. It was a large metal wall built around a valley, keeping people out. Players walked along the tops of the walls, holding bows, guarding the large settlement. We approached at the large gate in the front, and immediately 3 people spawned in front of us. 3 men. One walked in front and spoke.
Just passing through, or looking to stay?
They all wore simple iron, and the boy who spoke didn't look nor sound to be over 18. Cora answered.
Just restocking on resistance crystals, then heading out.
The boy nodded and teleported back inside before the gates began to open, revealing a large desert-themed town sitting in front of us. This place seems nice. I never even think about desert areas when I think about fantasy, but this changes things, I said to the two. The three of us passed by a large crater in the ground, leading down into one that seemed to be a mine. Many minecarts were set up beside it, filled to the brim with chunks of glowing rock. Within the deep crater were glittering crystals hidden in its walls, lighting up the deep tunnel. This must be where they mine for crystals, I thought to myself.
So, why is this place important?
Kira asked. Well, assuming I was right before, this place probably has a big player population. With a large population, more likely it is that someone here will know how to find the temple, I told them. It's more of a hunch than an actual plan, though. Cora sighed.
Well, this better be a pretty good hunch. I did not walk all the way out here just to end up at a dead end.
Better than sitting out in the desert sulking.
She said to Cora with a frown before wrapping an arm around mine.
Liru's still in our party, so she'll catch up with us soon.
Well, while we're here, we may as well get something to eat. I'm starving.
Cora told us as she rubbed her tummy. How filling was the blood she took from Kieran earlier this morning. The three of us walked over to an ice cream parlor set up near the entrance, Cora leading the way. But as soon as she opened the front door, her bow staff appeared in her hands.
I know you!
Cora shouted at a man inside the parlor. The man turned to her and frowned.
Oh, it's you.
Cora,
are you okay? I asked as Kira and I entered the parlor. Through tears, she screamed at him.
You son of a bitch! You ruined my life! We were on a path to greatness. The four of us walked down the path, our heads high and our minds full of thoughts. I stood in the back, looking ahead at the others. My boyfriend, Casey, who I had met 2 weeks ago. He was the one who taught me to fight, and was the first person I met online. Then his brother, Rick. He seemed a bit quirky, but nonetheless was a good player. His magic was superb, and his healing was exceptional. He seemed to keep us from dying. Only one of us needed a revive, but that was after we accidentally wandered into the Warlock King's territory. After Lana and Justin dropped me several weeks ago, I was severed from others. I spoke to nobody until I got this game. Then I met her shortly after I met Casey. She was nice to me, unlike other girls, and I was proud to call her a friend. We had recently gotten the idea to start a shop in Bandora. Laura and Casey had the combined money to buy a space, and Rick had the idea. I had the crafting skills. Rick had the idea to start a crystal selling business, since not many shops in Bandora sold crystals, considering the traveling distance between the city and the Crystal Desert. However, Rick also found a way around that. He got from a source that there was a warp from the Warlock Forest to the Crystal Desert, and gave us a map. If we could go back and forth quick, the walk from the Warlock Forest in Bandora City was only a few hours compared to half a day. Now we were on the way there, but something seemed up. Rick was smiling, but in a more devious way. He walked closer to Casey, whispering something in his ear. Casey stopped. As he stopped, so did the rest of us. He seemed to be frozen, but managed to turn around. He was looking at me, tears rushing down his face as thunder crashed in the distance. Laura looked at me as well, but neither of us had any idea what was going on.
I thought you were the one.
What are... Rick pulled out a photo, taken by a camera probably bought from a Bandora City shop. It showed me, my arms wrapped around a stranger's body seductively, and my lips on his. I also had no top. Neither did he.
You betrayed me.
That's not... He pulled out another photo, showing off me once more. However, I was standing in front of 2 menus. One was of our guild storage, and the other was on my inventory, and I was transferring money from one to the other.
You're the one who stole our world chips.
That's not me! I cried out, but it was too late. The damage was done. Casey turned around, beginning to tear up. He opened the menu, ragingly tapping a few buttons. Then they began to walk off down the path, leaving me standing there as rain began to drip down. I stared at the box in front of me. You have been removed from your guild.
You fucking bitch, we've been saving those for months now.
I fell to my knees, feeling a sense of loss in front of me as their figures disappeared from render distance. They were all gone. My new friends. My only friends. Tears dropped from my face as I sniffled, being lost in the rain's downpour. One thing kept me going, and it was the truth.
Immediately, Cora went to strike him down with her staff. However, she didn't get a chance as the man's hands began to glow. He sent her flying backwards out the door as a beam of red energy burst from his hands.
Stay out of this! This is my fight!
Shouted Cora. We nodded and stood to the side. Finally, the icon disappeared and Cora rushed forward. She drew her staff and jumped in front of him, ready to strike him down. However, his palms began to glow, and we watched as he sent a single strike with the center of his palm to her stomach. She flew backwards, a burst of energy hitting her straight on. However, she dug her staff into the ground and stopped herself from skidding.
Just as impulsive as I remember. You always reverted to your fists rather than words.
He commented with a cocky attitude.
Shut up!
She screamed at him. Kira and I watched from the sidelines as Cora began to change, her body growing ever so slightly. Her claws and fangs sharpened like steel, and the small horns on her head grew into a spiral. 2 black wings sprung from her back, and her breasts grew a size up. She raced at him with a scream, strafing left and right as he shot glowing balls of energy into her direction. She slipped past each one, eventually shooting upwards and taking flight with her wings. She then shot downwards, slamming her boot into his chest. The man sent her flying back with a burst of lightning, knocking her into the dirt. He held his hands up and fired several lightning strings at the succubus. Cora immediately recovered, holding up her hands and absorbing the brunt of the attack.
You can't keep this up!
He shouted. She ducked and dived to the side, ready to strike him down. The lightning faded from his hands as he jumped back up, making a fist. She charged at him and swung her claws just as he slammed his glowing fist forward at her. They collided, and the spell smashed her into the ground. The girl cried out in pain as her new form faded, leaving her defenseless. She reached for her staff, but he stomped down on her hand. His hand began to glow once more, and we watched as a sword made of white energy formed in his hand. He prepared to strike her down, but that wouldn't slide with me. I walked up from behind him and tapped on his shoulder. Hey, muffin sack.
What?
With a single swing, I sliced his hand off, causing him to fall to the ground with a scream. Whatever safe zone parameters were on here didn't seem to be working, as the man began to roll around in the dirt, crying out in pain.
Aldren, that was...
Yeah, I know. Your fight. But we're friends. Would you rather have him taken your stuff? I asked her. She took a second to think, but then smiled at me after.
Thank you, Aldren.